Hello everyone, this week's saint is Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Saint Ignatius was born in the year 1491 and he died in the year 1556 at the age of 65. So he was fairly young when he passed away. We like to think that people in this time period didn't live that long, but 65 was still fairly young. People did live into their 70s and their 80s, especially those of noble birth like he was. And he was born into the Spanish family of Basque, and he was the youngest of 13 children. So he didn't have any need to have babies or get married. He could be a pretty selfish person if he wanted to, and he was for a good chunk of his youth until he became around a teenager and a later teenager and decided to join the military. In the military, he was taught to not be selfish. He gave his life to the crown, and he was taught dignity and chivalry. And he took part in the defense of Pamplona against the French, which unfortunately did not end up well for Spain or Ignatius, as he was badly injured in that fight and was sent to the hospital for many months in recovery. And during that time in recovery, he wanted to read because he was bored out of his mind. But he wanted to read romance novels. He loved the drama of those kinds of genres. But they didn't have that. So instead they gave him books about the saints. And at first he thought they were extremely boring and useless, but he read them nonetheless because he was just that bored. After months of reading these texts, he eventually started to like them. He started to see how important these saints' lives were. And he eventually wanted to then become a priest himself, because all these saints were priests at the time. And while he was studying to become a priest, he convinced a few other seminarians to create a new religious order, and that was called the Society of Jesus, or as we would know them today as the Jesuits. And during this time, he was dealing with a lot of church unrest because of a heretic called Martin Luther, who was causing a lot of issues in the Catholic Church during this time. And the Jesuits were a kind of counter-revolution to the Protestant Revolution. They were the ones trying to keep the Catholic faith, and the Protestants were the ones trying to remove themselves from the Catholic faith. They could be credited with saving the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, or at least were a huge part in making sure that the Roman Catholic Church continued to be relevant. Ignatius was known for putting the gospel before politics, which got him into trouble with the monarchs as they wanted their agenda to be at the forefront, but he didn't think that that was right. God's agenda was most important, and that did get him into trouble from time to time. But because of his piety and his contribution to the Roman Catholic faith, they overlooked a lot, and they revered and looked up to him because of his piety and his dedication to the gospel. His understanding of contemplation in action was an important reminder that prayer without action is pointless. He thought that if you were praying and praying and praying and didn't feel compelled to do anything, then what you were praying about or how you were praying needs to change, because true prayer leads to true action. You cannot have one or the other. You need to have both, according to Saint Ignatius. And the main point that we can learn from Saint Ignatius is that God can show up and call us in the most unlikely of places. Ignatius was not a significantly religious person. He practiced the faith because that was the common thing to do, but he didn't really believe in it or take it to heart. But because of his circumstances of needing to recover in the hospital and the injuries that he had to suffer through, he saw God. And I think it's an important reminder that suffering does not necessarily mean that God is not present, and that sometimes through our suffering, we can see God's presence even more deeply than we would when things are going well. So don't discount the ability of God to meet us in our suffering and the importance of that and where it can lead us into our future. His curiosity and his boredom led him to become one of the greatest spiritual teachers of all time. And God is calling each and every one of us into something like that. We don't necessarily going to be the greatest spiritual teacher of all time, or one of them, if we're being fair, but we all are called to do something. And all of us are important, and all of us are needed. Without us, there is no church. Without worshipers, there is no community. And God needs us to do God's work in the world. Doesn't mean God doesn't show up, doesn't mean that God won't show up, but God wants us to take ownership of our lives and of our communities and of this world. We were given the earth to show dominion over, and not in a dominant sense, but in a subservient sense. We were given this land to take care of, not to dominate, but to take care of. And we need to remember, as he said, prayer without action is dead. We must have action after praying. And he has given us so many spiritual practices that we can try. Not all of them are going to work for us, and that's okay. We don't have to like everything that he's created, and we don't even have to do any of the things that he's created. If there's another spiritual practice that works for you, please do that one. If it leads you to deeper understanding of faith, to deeper empathy, to more kindness, to allowing ourselves to be more of a servant to God, then keep doing that. But there are a bunch of practices that have helped people throughout the 600 years that he has since passed, that can help us get closer to God and closer to action into what God is calling us to do. I will have a link to a bunch of Ignatius of Loyola resources, and I hope that you take a moment to learn more about St. Ignatius of Loyola, because he truly is a remarkable figure and one that Christians should remember. All right, take care and God bless.